The Laws of Etiquette, by a Gentleman, book written in 1836. The Laws of Etiquette. Or Short Rules and Reflections. 4. Conduct in Society. By a Gentleman. Philadelphia. 1836. I thought it was a good book. People still judge others based on social manners at a first encounter. Every good con artist is a great charmer. Even if you're a good person, you still need a good personable manner. Find it online at openlibrary.org. Works OL220696113W. djmcadam.com. Laws Etiquette HTML. Gutenberg.org. Files 5681. Archive.org. Details. Dank Eman 242. The table of contents are as follows. Preface. Introduction. Chapter I. Good Breeding. Chapter 2. Dress. Chapter 3. Salutations. Chapter 4. The Drawing Room. Company. Conversation. Chapter V. The Entrance into Society. Chapter 6. Letters. Chapter 7. Visits. Chapter 8. Appointments and Punctuality. Chapter 9. Dinner. Chapter X. Traveling. Chapter 11. Balls. Chapter 12. Funerals. Chapter 13. Servants. Chapter 14. Fashion. Chapter 15. Miscellaneous. Preface. The author of the present volume has endeavored to embody, in as short a space as possible, some of the results of his own experience and observation in society, and submits the work to the public, with the hope that the remarks which are contained in it, may prove available for the benefit of others. It is, of course, scarcely possible that anything original should be found in a volume like this. Almost all that it contains must have fallen under the notice of every man of penetration who has been in the habit of frequenting good society. Many of the precepts have probably been contained in works of a similar character which have appeared in England and France since the days of Lord Chesterfield. Nothing, however, has been copied from them in the compilation of this work, the author having in fact scarcely any acquaintance with books of this description, and many years having elapsed since he has opened even the pages of the noble oracle. He has drawn entirely from his own resources, with the exception of some hints for arrangement and a few brief reflections, which have been derived from the French. The present volume is almost apart from criticism. It has no pretensions to be judged as a literary work, its sole merit depending upon its correctness and fitness of application. Upon these grounds he ventures to hope for it a favorable reception. Introduction. The great error into which nearly all foreigners and most Americans fall, who write or speak of society in this country, arises from confounding the political with the social system. In most other countries, in England, France, and all those nations whose government is monarchical or aristocratic, these systems are indeed similar. Society is there intimately connected with the government, and the distinctions in one are the origin of gradations in the other. The chief part of the society of the kingdom is assembled in the capital, and the same persons who legislate for the country legislate also for it. But in America the two systems are totally unconnected and altogether different in character. In remodeling the form of the administration, society remained unrepublican. There is perfect freedom of political privilege, all are the same upon the hustings, or at a political meeting, but this equality does not extend to the drawing room or the parlor. None are excluded from the highest councils of the nation, but it does not follow that all can enter into the highest ranks of society. In point of fact, we think that there is more exclusiveness in the society of this country than there is in that even of England, far more than there is in France. And the explanation may perhaps be found in the fact which we hate mentioned above. There being there less danger of permanent disarrangement or confusion of ranks by the occasional admission of the low-born aspirant, there does not exist the same necessity for a jealous guarding of the barriers as there does here. The distinction of classes, also, after the first or second, is actually more clearly defined and more rigidly observed in America, than in any country of Europe, Persons unaccustomed to look searchingly at these matters, may be surprised to hear it, but we know from observation, that there are among the respectable, in any city of the United States, at least 10 distinct ranks. We cannot, of course, here point them out, because we could not do it without mentioning names. Every man is naturally desirous of finding entrance into the best society of his country, and it becomes therefore a matter of importance to ascertain what qualifications are demanded for admittance. A writer who is popularly unpopular, has remarked, that the test of standing in Boston, is literary eminence, in New York, wealth, and in Philadelphia, purity of blood. To this remark, we can only oppose our opinion, that none of these are indispensable and none of them sufficient. The society of this country, unlike that of England, does not court literary talent. We have cases in our recollection, which prove the remark, in relation to the highest ranks, even of Boston. Wealth has no pretensions to be the standard anywhere. In New York, the Liverpool of America, although the rich may make greater display and bruit, yet all of the merely rich, will find that there does exist a small and unchanging circle, whether above or below them, it is not ours to say, yet completely apart from them, into which they would rejoice to find entrance and from which they would be glad to receive emigrants. Whatever may be the accomplishments necessary to render one capable of reaching the highest platform of social eminence, and it is not easy to define clearly what they are, there is one thing and one alone, which will enable any man to retain his station there, and that is, good breeding. Without it, we believe that literature, wealth, and even blood, will be unsuccessful. By it, if it coexist with a certain capacity of affording pleasure by conversation, anyone, we imagine, could frequent the very best society in every city of America, and perhaps the very best alone. To obtain, then, the manners of a gentleman is a matter of no small importance. We do not pretend that a man will be metamorphosed into a gentleman by reading this book, or any other book. Refined manners are like refined style, which Cicero compares to the color of the cheeks, which is not acquired by sudden or violent exposure to heat but by continual walking in the sun. Good manners can certainly only be acquired by much usage in good company. But there are a number of little forms, imperiously enacted by custom, which may be taught in this manner, and the conscious ignorance of which often prevents persons from going into company at all. These forms may be abundantly absurd, but still they must be attended to, for one half the world does and always will observe them, and the other half is at a great disadvantage if it does not. Intercourse is constantly taking place, and an awkward man of letters, in the society of a polished man of the world, is like a strong man contending with a skillful fencer. Mr. Addison says, that he once saw the ablest mathematician in the kingdom utterly embarrassed, from not knowing whether he ought to stand or sit when my Lord Duke drank his health. Some of the many errors which are liable to be committed through ignorance of usage, are pleasantly pointed out in the following story, which is related by a French writer. The Abb. Cassin, professor in the College Mazarine, thoroughly accomplished in the art of teaching, saturated with Greek, Latin and literature, considered himself a perfect well of science. He had no conception that a man who knew all Perseus and Horace by heart could possibly commit an error, above all, an error at table. But it was not long before he discovered his mistake. One day, after dining with the Abb. de Redonvillers at Versailles, in company with several courtiers and marshals of France, he was boasting of the rare acquaintance with etiquette and custom which he had exhibited at dinner. The Abb. de Lille, who heard this eulogy upon his own conduct, interrupted his harangue, by offering to wager that he had committed at least 100 improprieties at the table. "How is it possible?" exclaimed Cassin. "I did exactly like the rest of the company." "What absurdity!" said the other. "You did 1,000 things which no one else did. First, when you sat down at the table, what did you do with your napkin?" "My napkin? Why, just what everybody else did with theirs. I unfolded it entire and fastened it to my buttonhole." "Well, my dear friend," said de Lille, "you were the only one that did that, at all events." No one hangs up his napkin in that style, they are contented with placing it on their knees. And what did you do when you took your soup? Like the others, I believe. I took my spoon in one hand and my fork in the other. Your fork. Whoever eats soup with a fork, but to proceed, after your soup, what did you eat? A fresh egg. And what did you do with the shell? Handed it to the servant who stood behind my chair. Without breaking it? Without breaking it, of course. Well, my dear ABB, nobody ever eats an egg without breaking the shell. And after your egg? I asked the ABB, Radon Villers, to send me a piece of the hen near him. Bless my soul. A piece of the hen? You never speak of hens excepting in the barnyard. You should have asked for fowl or chicken. But you say nothing of your mode of drinking. Like all the rest, I asked for claret and champagne. Let me inform you, then, that persons always ask for claret wine and champagne wine. But, tell me, how did you eat your bread? Surely I did that properly. I cut it with my knife, in the most regular manner possible. Bread should always be broken, not cut. But the coffee, how did you manage it? It was rather too hot and I poured a little of it into my saucer. Well, you committed here the greatest fault of all. You should never pour your coffee into the saucer but always drink it from the cup. The poor ABB was confounded. He felt that though one might be master of the 7 sciences, yet that there was another species of knowledge which, if less dignified, was equally important. This occurred many years ago, but there is not one of the observances neglected by the ABB, Kasan, which is not enforced with equal rigidness in the present day. Chapter I. Good breeding. The formalities of refined society were at first established for the purpose of facilitating the intercourse of persons of the same standing and increasing the happiness of all to whom they apply. They are now kept up, both to assist the convenience of intercourse and to prevent too great familiarity. If they are carried too far and escape from the control of good sense, they become impediments to enjoyment. Among the Chinese they serve only the purpose of annoying to an incalculable degree. The government, says de Marcy, in writing of China, constantly applies itself to preserve, not only in the court and among the great but among the people themselves, a constant habit of civility and courtesy. The Chinese have an infinity of books upon such subjects. One of these treatises contains more than 3,000 articles. Everything is pointed out with the most minute detail, the manner of saluting, of visiting, of making presents, of writing letters, of eating, etc., and these customs have the force of laws. No one can dispense with them. There is a special tribunal at Peking, of which it is one of the chief duties, to ensure the observance of these civil ordinances. One would think that one was here reading an account of the capital of France. It depends, then, upon the spirit in which these forms are observed, whether their result shall be beneficial or not. The French and the Chinese are the most formal of all the nations. Yet the one is the stiffest and most distant, the other the easiest and most social. We may define politeness, says La Bruyere, though we cannot tell where to fix it in practice. It observes received usages and customs, is bound to times and places, and is not the same thing in the two sexes or in different conditions. Wit alone cannot obtain it. It is acquired and brought to perfection by emulation. Some dispositions alone are susceptible of politeness, as others are only capable of great talents or solid virtues. It is true politeness puts merit forward and renders it agreeable, and a man must have eminent qualifications to support himself without it. Perhaps even the greatest merit cannot successfully straggle against unfortunate and disagreeable manners. Lord Chesterfield says that the Duke of Marlborough owed his first promotions to the suavity of his manners, and that without it he could not have risen. La Bruyere has elsewhere given this happy definition of politeness, the other passage being rather a description of it. Politeness seems to be a certain care, by the manner of our words and actions, to make others pleased with us and themselves. We must here stop to point out an error which is often committed both in practice and opinion, and which consists in confounding together the gentleman and the man of fashion. No two characters can be more distinct than these. Good sense and self-respect are the foundations of the one, notoriety and influence the objects of the other. Men of fashion are to be seen everywhere, a pure and mere gentleman is the rarest thing alive. Brummel was a man of fashion, but it would be a perversion of terms to apply to him a very expressive word in our language, a word, denoting an assemblage of many real virtues and of many qualities approaching to virtues and an union of manners at once pleasing and commanding respect, the word gentleman. Asterisk. The requisites to compose this last character are natural ease of manner and an acquaintance with the outward habit of encounter, dignity and self-possession, a respect for all the decencies of life and perfect freedom from all affectation. Dr. Johnson's bearing during his interview with the king showed him to be a thorough gentleman and demonstrates how rare and elevated that character is. When His Majesty expressed in the language of compliment his high opinion of Johnson's merits, the latter bowed in silence. If Chesterfield could have retained sufficient presence of mind to have done the same on such an occasion, he would have applauded himself to the end of his days. So delicate is the nature of those qualities that constitute a gentleman, that there is but one exhibition of this description of persons in all the literary and dramatic fictions from Shakespeare downward. Scott has not attempted it. Bulwer, in Pelham, has shot wide of the mark. It was reserved for the author of two very singular productions, Sydenham and its continuation Alice Paulet, works of extraordinary merits and extraordinary faults, to portray this character completely, in the person of Mr. Paulet. * Charles Butler's Reminiscences. Chapter 2. Dress. First impressions are apt to be permanent, it is therefore of importance that they should be favorable. The dress of an individual is that circumstance from which you first form your opinion of him. It is even more prominent than manner, it is indeed the only thing which is remarked in a casual encounter, or during the first interview. It, therefore, should be the first care. What style is to our thoughts, dress is to our persons. It may supply the place of more solid qualities, and without it the most solid are of little avail. Numbers have owed their elevation to their attention to the toilet. Place, fortune, marriage have all been lost by neglecting it. A man need not mingle long with the world to find occasion to exclaim with Sedaine, "Ah! Mon habit, que je vous remercie." In spite of the proverb, the dress often does make the monk. Your dress should always be consistent with your age and your natural exterior. That which looks outward, on one man, will be agreeable on another. As success in this respect depends almost entirely upon particular circumstances and personal peculiarities, it is impossible to give general directions of much importance. We can only point out the field for study and research, it belongs to each one's own genius and industry to deduce the results. However ugly you may be, rest assured that there is some style of habiliment which will make you passable. If, for example, you have a stain upon your cheek which rivals in brilliancy the best Chateau Margaux, or, are afflicted with a nose whose luster dims the ruby, you may employ such hues of dress, that the eye, instead of being shocked by the strangeness of the defect, will be charmed by the graceful harmony of the colors. Every one cannot indeed be an Adonis, but it is his own fault if he is an Aesop. If you have bad, squinting eyes, which have lost their lashes and are bordered with red, you should wear spectacles. If the defect be great, your glasses should be colored. In such cases emulate the sky rather than the sea. Green spectacles are an abomination, fitted only for students in divinity. Blue ones are respectable and even distinguished. Almost every defect of face may be concealed by a judicious use and arrangement of hair. Take care, however, that your hair be not of one color and your whiskers of another, and let your wig be large enough to cover the whole of your red or white hair. It is evident, therefore, that though a man may be ugly, there is no necessity for his being shocking. Would that all men were convinced of this. I verily believe that if Mr. in his walking dress and Mr. in his evening costume were to meet alone, in some solitary place, where there was nothing to divert their attention from one another, they would expire of mutual hideousness. If you have any defect, so striking and so ridiculous as to procure you a nickname, then indeed there is but one remedy: renounce society. In the morning, before 11 o'clock, even if you go out, you should not be dressed. You would be stamped a parvenu if you were seen in anything better than a reputable old frock coat. If you remain at home and are a bachelor, it is permitted to receive visitors in a morning gown. In summer, calico; in winter, figured cloth, faced with fur. At dinner, a coat, of course, is indispensable. The effect of a frock coat is to conceal the height. If, therefore, you are beneath the ordinary statue, or much above it, you should affect frock coats on all occasions that etiquette permits. Before going to a ball or party, it is not sufficient that you consult your mirror 20 times. You must be personally inspected by your servant or a friend. Through defect of this, I once saw a gentleman enter a ballroom, attired with scrupulous elegance, but with one of his suspenders curling in graceful festoons about his feet. His glass could not show what was behind. If you are about to present yourself in a company composed only of men, you may wear boots. If there be but one lady present, pumps and silk stockings are indispensable. There is a common proverb which says, that if a man be well dressed as to head and feet, he may present himself everywhere. The assertion is as false as Mr. Kemble's voice. Happy indeed if it were necessary to perfect only the extremities. The coat, the waistcoat, the gloves, and, above all, the cravat, must be alike ignorant of blemish. Upon the subject of the cravat, for heaven's sake and Brummels, never appear in a stock after 12 o'clock, we cannot at present say anything. If we were to say anything, we could not be content without saying all, and to say all would require a folio. A book has been published upon the subject, entitled The Cravat Considered in its Moral, Literary, Political, Military, and Religious Attributes. This and a clever, though less profound, treatise on the art of tying the cravat, are as indispensable to a gentleman as an ice at 12 o'clock. When we speak of excellence in dress, we do not mean richness of clothing, nor manifested elaboration. Faultless propriety, perfect harmony, and a refined simplicity — these are the charms which fascinate here. It is as great a sin to be finical in dress as to be negligent. Upon this subject the ladies are the only infallible oracles. Apart from the perfection to which they must of necessity arrive, from devoting their entire existence to such considerations, they seem to be endued with an inexpressible tact, a sort of sixth sense, which reveals intuitively the proper distinctions. That your dress is approved by a man is nothing, you cannot enjoy the high satisfaction of being perfectly comme il faut, until your performance has received the seal of a woman's approbation. If the benefits to be derived from cultivating your exterior do not appear sufficiently powerful to induce attention, the inconveniences arising from too great disregard may perhaps prevail. Sir Matthew Hale, in the earlier part of his life, dressed so badly that he was once seized by the press gang. Not long since, as I entered the hall of a public hotel, I saw a person so villainously habited, that supposing him to be one of the servants, I desired him to take my luggage upstairs, and was on the point of offering him a shilling, when I discovered that I was addressing the Honorable Mr. ***, one of the most eminent American statesmen. Chapter 3. Salutations. The salutation, says a French writer, is the touchstone of good breeding. According to circumstances, it should be respectful, cordial, civil, affectionate, or familiar — an inclination of the head, a gesture with the hand, the touching or doffing of the hat. If you remove your hat, you need not at the same time bend the dorsal vertebrae of your body, unless you wish to be very reverential, as in saluting a bishop. It is a mark of high breeding not to speak to a lady in the street, until you perceive that she has noticed you by an inclination of the head. Some ladies courtesy in the street, a movement not gracefully consistent with locomotion. They should always bow. If an individual of the lowest rank, or without any rank at all, takes off his hat to you, you should do the same in return. A bow, says La Fontaine, is a note drawn at sight. If you acknowledge it, you must pay the full amount. The two best-bred men in England, Charles II and George IV, never failed to take off their hats to the meanest of their subjects. Avoid condescending bows to your friends and equals. If you meet a rich parvenu, whose consequence you wish to reprove, you may salute him in a very patronizing manner, or else, in acknowledging his bow, look somewhat surprised and say, Mr. If you have remarkably fine teeth, you may smile affectionately upon the bowee, without speaking. In passing ladies of rank, whom you meet in society, bow but do not speak. If you have anything to say to anyone in the street, especially a lady, however intimate you may be, do not stop the person but turn round and walk in company. You can take leave at the end of the street. If there is any one of your acquaintance, with whom you have a difference, do not avoid looking at him, unless from the nature of things the quarrel is necessarily for life. It is almost always better to bow with cold civility, though without speaking. As a general rule, never cut anyone in the street. Even political and steamboat acquaintances should be noticed by the slightest movement in the world. If they presume to converse with you, or stop you to introduce their companion, it is then time to use your eyeglass and say, I never knew you. If you address a lady in the open air, you remain uncovered until she has desired you twice to put on your hat. In general, if you are in any place where etiquette requires you to remain uncovered or standing and a lady, or one much your superior, requests you to be covered or to sit, you may how off the command. If it is repeated, you should comply. You thereby pay the person a marked but delicate compliment, by allowing their will to be superior to the general obligations of etiquette. When two Americans, who have not been introduced, meet in some public place, as in a theater, a stagecoach, or a steamboat, they will sit for an hour staring in one another's faces but without a word of conversation. This form of unpoliteness has been adopted from the English, and it is as little worthy of imitation as the form of their government. Good sense and convenience are the foundations of good breeding, and it is assuredly vastly more reasonable and more agreeable to enjoy a passing gratification, when no sequent evil is to be apprehended, than to be rendered uncomfortable by an ill-founded pride. It is therefore better to carry on an easy and civil conversation. A snuff-box, or some polite accommodation rendered, may serve for an opening. Talk only about generalities. The play, the roads, the weather. Avoid speaking of persons or politics, for, if the individual is of the opposite party to yourself, you will be engaged in a controversy. If he holds the same opinions, you will be overwhelmed with a flood of vulgar intelligence, which may soil your mind. Be reservedly civil while the colloquy lasts, and let the acquaintance cease with the occasion. When you are introduced to a gentleman, do not give your hand but merely bow with politeness, and if you have requested the introduction, or know the person by reputation, you may make a speech. I am aware that high authority might easily be found in this country to sanction the custom of giving the hand upon a first meeting, but it is undoubtedly a solecism in manners. The habit has been adopted by us, with some improvement for the worse, from France. When two Frenchmen are presented to one another, each presses the other's hand with delicate affection. The English, however, never do so, and the practice, if abstractly correct, is altogether inconsistent with the caution of manner which is characteristic of their nation and our own. If we are to follow the French, in shaking hands with one whom we have never before seen, we should certainly imitate them also in kissing our intimate male acquaintances. If, however, you ought only to bow to a new acquaintance, you surely should do more to old ones. If you meet an intimate friend 50 times in a morning, give your hand every time. An observance of propriety, which, though worthy of universal adoption, is in this country only followed by the purists in politeness. The requisitions of etiquette, if they should be obeyed at all, should be obeyed fully. This decent formality prevents acquaintance from being too distant, while, at the same time, it preserves the familiar from becoming vulgar. They may be little things, but these little things are great to little men.